and Bendy.
Hello and welcome to the podcast they could not stop, Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art. Now, I'm Vladimir Nushtak, art critic of the Sunday Times, and I'm joined at the bridge of this ship of fools by a man who bestrides the borders between England and Scotland like a colossus. He's tall, he's lean, and when his name rings out across the borders, even the shepherds rest their crooks against the nearest rock and stop to listen. To the world, he's Bendor Grosvenor, the colossus of art. But to us on this podcast, he's Bendy. Lovely, lovely Bendy. Bendy, how are you?
I'm all right, thanks, Weld. Shortly before I joined you for this recording, I bought a little sleeper. I was bidding online, a little online auction, and I got something I wasn't expecting to get. So I always have a spring in my step when I see you, but I've got an extra special spring in my step today.
So you bought yourself yet another of your famous sleepers. These are unidentified masterpieces, which you then resell at a vast profit and make yourself richer and richer and richer.
Oh no, it's not. It's not a great masterpiece. It's something for me to keep. It's just a little trinket. But anyway, I'll show it to you if you come up one day. I'll show it to you.
Oh, that would be lovely. I would love to come up, although I have to say not today, because if truth be told, I'm not feeling great. I'm feeling a little bit hungover, is the truth. Yeah.
Me too, Weld. And I have here a little glass of red wine because I'm drinking. I'm raising a toast to you because I saw a fantastic review in The Guardian for your program, which I went out last night. Art's Most Erotic on Sky Arts.
Yes,
and you got 5 stars. So how about that?
I know, 5 stars of The Guardian. I could just about see it myself through blurry eyes. I had some people round last night. So it was a mix of crew who made the series, but some friends and family and what have you. And I'm afraid they were pouring gallons of Carver down my throat. And this giant Carver lake at the bottom of my stomach has made me feel really bad. So if I sound blurry and my brain's obviously scrambled, that'll be the reason.
Another reason I have this flagon of red wine here. Do you remember last week we were discussing Caravaggio's picture of Bacchus as part of our drinking series?
Of course.
Yeah. And I was struggling to understand quite what the message was. Now, one of the key points of the message of the picture you said was the fact that his glass of red wine was shaking, and that revealed that he'd had too much to drink and he was suffering the next day from a hangover, and that the picture was a warning against the perils of drinking too much. But I couldn't understand why he was looking so healthy. The young boy in the picture is looking so chipper, as if he's not got a drinking problem. So I've got this glass of wine here because I've been trying to recreate that tremor in the glass, okay? And I don't know if people can, listening, obviously they can't see this, so I'm going to describe it. But now I'm going to shake the glass, and I can't get that little tremor. It just sort of slurps around the place.
Well, all that proves is that you're not Bacchus, and you're not Caravaggio. I mean, the painter obviously had to add a few extra ripples to make it work. But I'm so impressed that you've gone to all this trouble, this scientific trouble, to prove me wrong in my rippling wine thesis.
Yeah, well, look, but I have another thesis. That's the whole point of this, right? So I have another thesis. And I reckon the picture might be about the perils of being poisoned through drink, because you get the ripple effect if you drop a little something in the glass. And I'm going to do that now. I'll do it next to the mic so people can hear. Are you ready?
Yes.
Bing. There, did you? No, it's too fast for you to see it, but I'm sure Caravaggio could have caught that. But then you get the ripples going out like you're chucking a stone in a pond. Right. So I think the reason why Bacchus is looking so healthy and enticing is that actually he's offering you, the viewer, a glass of wine, and it's been poisoned. Now, when Caravaggio was painting the picture, they were obsessed with the idea of being poisoned. So I think it's as much as a warning about drink. Not only is drink bad for you, but it could end up being the end of you.
Look, I'm going to file that under the Bendor fantasies. I think we might start collecting a list of those, frankly. What's very heartening, Bendy, is that you've bothered enough with our interpretation of the painting to come back a week later with your major scientific experiments into the rippling of wine. That goes beyond the Call of Duty. It really does.
Rippling of Ribena in this case. But anyway, I think we should carry on investigating this. In fact, I would like to put a call out to our listeners. See if you can have a go with the rippling wine glass and see if you think the picture is about Valdemar's shaking wine hand or my poisoned wine. And let us know.
Well, since I've got a hangover myself, once I've finished doing this podcast, I might go and try and see what happens to my hand when I hold my next glass of wine. But let's crack on, Bendy. We can't spend a whole morning just talking about your wine fantasies. Now, later on in this podcast, we're going to be looking at some of the ghastly things that Donald Trump has been doing in the White House, Bendy. You know, he's been turning it into the Gold House. So that's coming up. We'll also be looking at a picture that you've chosen in which you say, and this is, again, one of your fantasies, in which you say there's a secret message, a clue. And if I can give the listeners a clue as to what that might be, I'm going to say one word. Right, this is the clue to Bendy's secret, and the clue is wolf. So think about that as you're waiting for Bendy to tell us what he's going to talk about. And don't forget, everybody, all the pictures that we talk about here, they're all illustrated in the show notes at zczfilms.com. And as a big plus for the podcast, a new plus, you can also see us as well as hear us on the ZCZ channel on YouTube. So if you're over 18 and you think you can handle the sight of Bendy and me with a hangover on your computer screen, that's the ZCZ channel on YouTube. First, though, after all that boozing last night, Bendy, I need some fresh air. So I know exactly where to go.
Bendel Grosvenor had a farm, E-I-E-I-O.
Ah, Bendy, the farm. Oh, it's lovely up here. Now, we've actually come up here in search of something I don't think you've got, which is swans. I don't know if you remember, but last week, Nigel Farage, the leader of the Reform Party, told us that gangs of marauding Eastern Europeans, that's people like my people, the Poles, that gangs have been stealing the royal swans and eating them. So apparently swans on toast is a big Eastern European delicacy. So in this podcast's big effort to save the few remaining swans left in our land, the ones that haven't been eaten by hungry Eastern Europeans, we've put together a list of the 5 best appearances by the swan in art. Now, Bendy, you don't have any swans on your farm, do you, actually, of course?
Do you know, every year it's strange that a couple of swans turn up and they spend about a day or two circling around the river and they make a great amount of noise and then they decide not to settle there and they fly off somewhere else. But every year we have a hope that we might get swans, but not this year.
Okay. Do you know what sort of swan they are?
I think they're mute swans, aren't they?
Yeah, well, this is it, you see, but there's 3 types of swan in England. Did you know that? 3 types of swan. So there's the mute swan, which is the one with the red sort of orangey beak, and there's 2 types of swan, the hooper swan and Buick swan, which are sort of smaller and have yellow beaks, and they are winter visitors. So they come from Iceland and Greenland and the north, and they come to England just for the winter. So there are 3 types of swan. But the ones that we're talking about, the ones that all us Eastern Europeans are apparently stealing from the royal parks, are mute swans. So I'm going to kick this off, right, with the first picture that I want to talk about. That's the first swan picture. And it's called Swan Upping in Cookham, and it's by Stanley Spencer. So you know it, I presume, Bendy.
Yeah, it's in Tate, is that right?
Yes, it's in the Tate, yeah. It's a typical view of Cookham by Spencer. As you know, he was born there. It was his village. It obsessed him all his life. And there's some chaps by the River Thames in Cookham, and they're putting their skiffs into the water. Skiff is a sort of little rowing boat that they use for collecting swans. And there are some swans already in a skiff that have been collected. And what we're seeing here is this ritual of swan upping, which has gone on apparently since the 12th century. Now, swans, as you know, are supposed to belong to the crown. So every mute swan in Britain belongs to the king and used to belong to the queen. And once a year in July, in and around Cookham and the stretches of the Thames River around there, gangs of blokes in fancy outfits, you know what the English are like with their historic costumes, gangs of blokes get onto their skiffs, collect all the swans they can find, ring them and number them and count them for the royal courts. So that's what Spencer's showing us. He's showing us a day really when this is happening, and it's a very interesting picture. I mean, have you looked at it properly in the gallery, Bendy?
Not for a long time, no. You're going to have to educate me about this one.
Well, okay, so, and also those people that are just listening to the podcast and aren't watching, what you've got is a couple of blokes carrying a boat. They're about to go in the river with it. Somebody else already on a boat moving a mattress, which I think is where they would sit while they're collecting. You've got the swans in the boat. But what's interesting is that we're looking down on them all. So Spencer is standing somewhere high, if you like, and we're looking down on this event that's taking place. And legend has it, see, a very interesting thing about this painting by Spencer, right? Do you know what the dates it was painted?
No idea.
Okay, 1914 to 1919. So that's 5 years, right? Why do you think that is? It took him so long.
Well, it's the First World War. He must have had other things to do.
Exactly. So he started it just before the war broke out, or rather before he was conscripted, and he finished it when he got back. So during the war, Spencer was a medical orderly in Macedonia. So he went away. There's a fantastic picture in the Imperial War Museum that he painted, you know, of the travois with wounded soldiers being pulled by horses to a field hospital. Very tragic. Anyway, so he went to war and he was traumatized by what he saw there. So this painting was started before the war, finished after. And the legend about it is that Spencer was actually at Mass, listening to the Mass, when the swan upping was going on, as it's called, and that he came back and then decided that he would paint the swan upping scene as part of a kind of memory of the Britain that he was leaving behind. So this is like a picture with a secret ambition, if you like, to be about Britain, and a young man off to the war is remembering the beautiful village landscape that he has left behind. So it's filled with these poignant moods. And Spencer featured in our erotic film, by the way. His erotic art is very, very nervy. And it was great fun filming in Cook. And we didn't see any swan upping, but we did see the village itself and the museum, which is in there, you know, the Stanley Spencer Museum. I don't know if you've been to that. The Stanley Spencer Gallery in Cookham. Have you visited, Bendy?
No, I haven't. As you know, I'm a bit of a stranger with the 20th century stuff. So another thing you've got to educate me on.
There's a lot of things I need to get you up to speed on. So yeah, go to Cookham, go to the Stanley Spencer Gallery, find out more about Stanley Spencer, find out how this weird fusion of religion, of village life and sex, how that animated his art. Anyway, Bendy, on that very, very low note, please lift us up and tell us something about another swan image or two, something more uplifting, please.
Well, I'm not sure this is going to be more uplifting. I'm going to lower the tone even further, I'm afraid. I am going to show you a picture by an English 17th century artist called Sir Nathaniel Bacon. And this picture, it's in a private collection. It's called Cookmaid with Still Life of Birds, and it's massive. It's about 2.5 meters wide. And what we see is on the left-hand side of the composition is our cookmaid, and she's holding an alive turkey. And she's also sitting by a kitchen table, which is covered with mostly dead birds. We've got all sorts of things that have been shot, poor things. And one of those dead birds is a swan. Now, you're the ornithologist here, so please tell me what kind of swan it is.
That actually has got a yellow beak. I think it's a Buick swan rather than a mute swan. But But Buick swans have got yellow beak, but it's got black on it, and this one doesn't have it. But anyway, it doesn't look like a mute swan. It also hasn't got, you know, mute swans have that knob on the beak, a kind of gnarled shape there. Well,
Right.
that's not there either. So yeah, I reckon it's either a Buick swan or a small hooper swan.
Well, if it's a Buick swan, then poor thing, it's come all the way from Iceland looking for a place to stay in the winter, and it's been shot. And we can probably see in the picture the man who shot it, because in the shadows, in our little kitchen scene here, standing behind the cookmaid, we see a hunter, and he's got a kind of musket slung over his shoulder. Now, pictures like this were quite rare in England, so we're talking about the 1620s. And actually, this is a sort of a breakthrough moment for British art, which didn't actually sustain itself, and I'll tell you why. So Nathaniel Bacon, right, great painter, but didn't paint very much. He was a gentleman, a man of leisure, a bit like yourself, Wild, and he was really an amateur, so he didn't paint professionally. And he lives in East Anglia, and he's a great gardener, and obviously a bit of a shot, I suspect. But he was also a bit of a traveller, and he goes over to the Low Countries a few times, and that's why you will probably recognise, well, that this still life, this great picture of abundant birds and a kitchen scene, is quite like Netherlandish still life paintings from the 16th century. So we're talking about, who are we talking about? People like
Peter Edson springs to mind immediately. Yeah,
yeah. And Peter Edson had a nephew, didn't he? It was called
Berkele.
Joachim Berkele. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. Now, those pictures tended to be still lifes with a kind of Christian message in the background. You get a sort of biblical narrative somewhere smuggled in. But we're talking about post-Reformation England here, so we're not so keen on the biblical messages in our pictures. And I think this one is really all about the birds. But the question is, what kind of birds? And here, I'm afraid, is where we have to lower the tone a bit, because Sir Nathaniel Bacon, being a gentleman of leisure, he really painted just what he wanted to see in his pictures. And I think it's no accident, well, that the cook maid in the painting here is very voluptuous, wouldn't you say?
yes, she is voluptuous. Yes. Oh, she's sticking out. Her décolletage is very visible, as it almost always is in these kinds of garden scenes with a kitchen maid or a girl selling stuff at the market stall. They are usually young and they are usually showing some things.
Yes, and in fact, if you were to look closely at this picture, you could see what we call in art history a pentimenti, where the artist has changed his mind. And in this case, Nathaniel Bacon has actually lowered her bodice so that she is even more revealed to us. And you can actually go and see a similar picture by Bacon, which is in the Tate, but there's got no dead birds in it, this one. That one's all about fruit and veg. And in that picture, the one in the Tate, our cook maid is holding, very obviously, a giant melon just beneath her voluptuousness. The pun is a bit carry-on, basically, and I think we can be sure that Nathaniel Bacon was a sort of what we would call a thigh rubber these days. And that, I think, takes us to the message in the painting, which is that the huntsman, who's got his rifle slung over his shoulder and is standing in the background, he's not admiring his haul of game, or indeed the beautiful dead swan. He is admiring the cookmaid's décolletage. So Nathaniel Bacon and his chums would have been painting things like this to have a good old sort of laugh and a bit of Sid James type banter. It's a nice picture, I think, but it just reminds you that pictures like this were not always about the beautiful swans.
No, they really are. I agree with your interpretation of it. Very noticeable that there's a big cock right at the front with a red crest, very prominently positioned. I don't think that's there by accident either. It's interesting, isn't it? Because all the Peter Edson paintings as well, the Dutch pictures and Flemish pictures that preceded this, they tend to have the same kinds of meaning, don't they? And I'm imagining, like in the 19th century, when artists wanted to observe women, I'm talking about the male gaze, of course, the predatory male gaze. When they wanted to observe women, they tended to go to the theatre. So all those paintings by Degas and others, Sickert, of beautiful ballerinas and dancers on the stage, you tend to feel that they're being ogled because there's a sort of safe space. If you're sitting in the audience, in the darkness of an audience, you can stare at people on the stage and the titillation comes that way. My feeling is that in the 17th century, that same sort of predatory male positioning and gaze was really only available in taverns, where you get also wenches serving the beer, and maybe market stalls. So young girls would be serving things there, and blokes would probably turn up with predatory ambitions and perhaps pockets full of money, and maybe that was what sort of went on in these market stalls. So there is, although it is a bit Sid Jamesy, and we can have a joke about it, there's probably quite a lot of sad truth underneath all this about females and young girls working in places like this who became the object of lust and uncontrolled desire. So perhaps there's a sadness as well being recorded here.
Yes, yes. Well, we extend our sympathies to Sir Nathaniel Bacon's wife, Lady Bacon. What have you got for us next?
Funny enough, you see, now we're on this theme of swans and the darkness of the swan. I'm going to take you to no less an artist than Hieronymus Bosch. And not only that, I'm going to take you to a painting which is in the Prado. It's the Adoration of the Magi. So it's a kind of nativity scene. It's the birth of the baby Jesus. And the three kings have followed the star across the heavens, and they've turned up at the stable to see the baby Jesus and Mary. So it's a triptych, so it's 3 panels, shaped interestingly, sort of rounded at the top. And in the middle panel, that's where the action is really. You see a very, very, very shaky stable, which incidentally, the shaky stable in art was always a metaphor for the state of the church. So the church had fallen into weakness and ruin, and Jesus had arrived to save it. So shaky stables usually have that kind of meaning. And inside the stable, the 3 kings have arrived, and they're adoring the Virgin Mary and the child. And on either side, you've got some donors on one side in the other panel. And interestingly, in the left-hand panel, you've got the donors again kneeling in front of the nativity, but also at the back. I don't know if you can see at the back, there's a chap sitting in the corner who seems to be doing some washing or something. That in a fascinating, a typical Hieronymus Bosch detail. That is actually Saint Joseph. So that's Joseph washing Jesus's nappies in a corner at the back of the panel. Only Hieronymus Bosch would have included that. But my
I can't, hang on, where's the swan? I'm looking everywhere. I can't see a swan.
This is it. Well, I'm going to do you a detail, right? I'm going to send you a detail. So in this detail, which is in fact a detail from the central panel, right? So right at the back of the central panel, behind the wonky stable, behind a bunch of soldiers chasing a Saracen, there's a building, and if you go to the right of it, there's a wall in front of it, and there's a bloke leaning out rather nervously from behind the wall. And as with Hieronymus Bosch, all the fun is in the details at the back. And if you look above him, you'll see a sign. And the sign, tiny, tiny, tiny sign, is a red sign with a white swan on it. So, what does the sign of the swan outside a building represent? Any ideas, Bendy?
Not a clue, no.
It's a brothel. In the Low Countries, swans hanging outside a house was the sign of the brothel. And I mean, in fact, I went once to Ghent, great town of Ghent. Yeah, and in Ghent there's a hotel, the Marriott Hotel, which used to be a brothel. And they still have 2 swans emblazoned on the front of the hotel, forming a kind of love triangle, as remnants of the days from its brothel days. So why is that? Well, it's part of this constant combining of the image of woman with the image of a bird, I think. I mean, like in England in the 60s, women were called birds. Right? Oh, I'm going out with my bird tonight. We don't do it anymore because it's rude and it's an unpleasant way of discussing women. Or I'm going out with my new chick, And this is all based on... There is a sort of language issue here, because apparently in Middle English, so way back in the Middle Ages, the word bird, spelled B-U-R-D-E, actually meant a woman, a young girl, probably a young girl of sort of marriageable age. And since bird sounds exactly like bird became the word that people used for a young woman. So it's a sort of misreading of the Old English word bird. It's not only in England that birds became birds, all over the continent. So vogel, which is the Dutch word for a bird, that also became the word that people used for a young girl, a marriageable young girl. So there is this whole etymological past, if you like, to this idea that a bird is somehow a symbol of a woman. And that, I think, is what underpins this idea that the brothel would have a bird sign outside it, and in particular a swan with its long phallic neck, right? Which is obviously something that we'd probably get onto in some of the later paintings. So, there it is. The back of Hieronymus Bosch, very, very deep into the distance, a brothel with a sign outside with a swan on it. How about that?
Well, yes, I take your word for it and your practical experience. It's extraordinary that they chose such a fine and beautiful bird and maligned the poor swan for centuries in Western culture.
Indeed it is. And of course Aphrodite used to be accompanied by the swan, didn't she, in Greek myths and things, so there's... Yeah, the poor old swan has had a very mixed past. What are we going to move on to? Something proper, I hope, Bendy.
Well, actually, not a painting, an actual swan or a kind of swan, an automaton swan. This is the extraordinary silver swan which belongs to the Bowes Museum. Have you been to the Bowes Museum in County Durham?
Have I been to the Bowes Museum in County Durham? Bendy, I went to the Bowes Museum in County Durham specifically to find another of your sleepers. Because
Right.
it's hanging there, isn't it? There's a Van Dyck that Bendor Grosvenor, sleeper searcher, found, right? I mean, I remember going all the way up there to see it. So I know the museum, indeed.
Ah, yeah, fine place. Yes, and that was a long time ago. I made a programme about that for the BBC. No, anyway, so the star of the Bowes Museum sadly is not my rediscovered Van Dyck, but is actually this silver swan, and they love it there so much that it's on their kind of marketing logo. And this was a silver swan made in London in the 1770s by a couple of extremely clever people. One of them was called James Cox, who was a silversmith and a goldsmith, and the other one was an ingenious inventor called John Joseph Merlin. So we're in the later 18th century, right? This is the age of invention, and all sorts of clever people doing extremely clever things with very finely made bits of metal. And these two got together and started to make these extraordinary automata. So the swan we see, how big is it? It's about 3 feet long. It appears to be made of solid silver, and it's sitting in a sort of a leafy silver basin, which has got tiny, lots and lots of small glass rods. Now, the extraordinary thing is that if you wind up the handle and set this machine going, the swan moves in all sorts of ways. So, first of all, it plays music, and then its neck will move and the beak moves, and its first action is to preen itself, so it'll sort of fiddle around with its feathers and its wings. It's so extraordinary. And its final action is, once it's finished preening itself and the head comes up, it then appears to suddenly notice something in the water beneath it. And these little glass rods, which are creating the illusion of the water, twist around, so it does look like it's shimmering. And suddenly, you notice in the water, shimmering as the glass rods move around, little fish popping up. And the swan notices too, and it dashes its head down, appears to pick up a fish, and eats it and swallows it. And this whole performance lasts for about 40 seconds while music is playing, and then it stops. Now, to make that in the 1770s was a work of extraordinary ingenuity. And the Swan was the star of their museum in London. They had a special museum for automata. And from this museum, they used to sell their wares. So, for example, Catherine the Great in Russia bought this extraordinary peacock clock from them, which is now in the Hermitage. And eventually the Swan was sold, and it ended up in a roundabout way in the museum in the Bowes Museum.
How about that? Where I think it must be their leading attraction, isn't it? I mean, every time I have been to the Bowes Museum, lots of people are gathered around it, desperately waiting for it to start up, because it's not on all the time, is it? It's a wonderful thing. And obviously kids love it. I've seen lots of children running around it, enjoying it. And it's also nice to see the swan just being a beautiful thing, a beautiful swan for once, without having all these dark ideas thrust upon it from the worlds of sexuality and all the other stuff. So it's a wonderful thing.
And I have to say, actually, another little proud moment, Weld, because there is another sleeper of mine, which you will now see in the Bowes Museum. In fact, it's right beside the Swan. So I mentioned that the inside of it was made by this clever fellow called John Joseph Merlin, who was a Dutch inventor who lived in London. Also invented things like the roller skate. Anyway, some time ago, I found a portrait of him by Thomas Gainsborough. It came up in European auction somewhere as a sort of unknown sitter and unknown artist. Anyway, so eventually I bought it and sold it to them, and there it is on display next to his greatest creation.
Bendy, sleepers, you must have discovered so many of these lost masterpieces in your time. I'm genuinely in awe of you. How do you do it? I mean, I know you must spend every waking moment looking through catalogues and searching for forgotten masterpieces. It must take up a lot of your time finding all these sleepers. And you don't even work on the railways, do you?
When you come and stay here, Weld, I'll show you the cupboards and cupboards full of the ones that didn't quite make it.
That'll redress the balance a bit. I'm going to move on to what I guess must be. I'm afraid it's another dark swan. It's another sexy swan, but I guess it must be the most insistent and famous of the swan legends, and that's of course the story of Leda and the Swan. We've all heard about it. Again, it's something I did the other day in my erotic program on Sky Arts. Now, Leda was a beautiful mortal, but she was lusted after by Zeus, the king of the gods. And Zeus, as you know, was a master of disguise. So every time he lusted after yet another beautiful mortal, he would find some way of coming down to earth and doing naughty things to them while pretending to be something else. So in the Europa myth, Zeus comes down disguised as a giant white bull, which plays with Europa on the beach and then runs off into the sea with her. And in the Io myth, he comes down as a cloud of fog, and this cloud of fog, she can't even see it because it's so foggy, but actually Zeus come down to pleasure her. So he's a master of disguise. And in the case of poor Leda, he comes down to her disguised as a swan. Now, there are loads of versions of the painting of Leda and the Swan. So I've decided to choose the Michelangelo one, which I'm sure you know, don't you, Bendy?
Yeah, well, it doesn't exist anymore, does it? So we have to go on copies and drawings.
Yes.
Is that right?
So there are loads of copies of it. The two most famous ones, I think, there's one by Rosso Fiorentino, the great Italian mannerist, and that's on show in the National Gallery in London. And there's another one by Rubens, which I like a lot. And Rubens was in Italy early in the 17th century, and he did lots of copies of things that are very useful to us today. But he's done a brilliant copy of Michelangelo's Leda and the Swan, which I suppose I should quickly describe for those that aren't watching on the ZCZ channel on YouTube or looking right now at our show notes. So it's a naked Leda with her little coronet seen from the side. Like a lot of Michelangelo's women, there are those who think that it looks so much like a bloke who is pretending to be a woman and who's had some breasts stuck on like tennis balls onto his chest. So I don't think anatomically we can say she's the most alluring of female figures, but she's slouched in this excellently erotic pose, and between her legs, coming up between her legs, with this long snaking swan neck approaching her lips, is Zeus disguised as the swan. So they're intertwined in this interesting position of love, and basically there's absolutely no question about what they're doing. And this is the thing about these Leda and the Swan pictures. Because actually, during the Renaissance, artists weren't allowed to show copulation. Although they could imply it, they could do all kinds of symbolic things that represent it, they couldn't actually show it. Except, really, in the case of Leda and the Swan. So the Leda and the Swan became this popular subject. Most of the Renaissance masters did a version of it. Leonardo da Vinci painted it. Most people painted it. And they did it because it gave them a chance to show, as it were, sex happening without sex happening in real life, if you like. So Michelangelo was apparently working on the Sistine ceiling when the project for this came up. So it was around 1512, he was finishing off the Sistine ceiling when the Duke of Ferrara, who had been excommunicated by the Pope, came to Rome to try and work out a deal about his excommunication. And while he was there, he had some downtime, and he went into the Sistine Chapel and he saw Michelangelo painting the Sistine ceiling, and he said to him, "Please, you must paint me a masterpiece." So Michelangelo agreed and said he would. But it wasn't until many years later, 1530 in fact, that he came up with this, his great image of Leda and the Swan.
And the Duke of Ferrara, he loves a classical picture, doesn't he? He loves an allegorical painting, because isn't he the one who commissions all those posy paintings from people like Bellini and Titian for his he has a special room for these kind of allegorical pictures, a lot of which are to do with nudity and sex.
That's him. That's the very same Duke of Ferrara, yes, and he had a taste for it. And he went to Michelangelo and said, please feed me some more of this stuff that I like. So, but it did take a while for it to happen, and it wasn't till 1530 that Michelangelo finally painted his very, very explicit Leda and the Swan. It's a fabulous image. I've got a version of it as a print by Cornelis de Bos. It hangs in my toilet, actually. Every time I'm sitting on the toilet looking up, I see Michelangelo's Leda and the Swan in this fantastic engraving. Because it is a very sexy, sultry image. But the thing is, right, you said it doesn't exist anymore. That's true. And the reason it doesn't exist was Francois le Premier, Francis I, the King of France. He was a great Italophile, so he brought lots of Italian artists over. He built the chateau at Fontainebleau, and he brought over Rosso Fiorentino, who made the copy while he was there, and other Italian painters. And Francis I was also a bit of a cocksmith, renowned as a lover of women. And he took a liking too to Michelangelo's Leda, and it came into his possession after the Duke of Ferrara lost it. And Francis I had it at Fontainebleau, and it stayed in Fontainebleau for a while. But at some point later, one of the jealous duchesses around the court had it destroyed for the very, very basic reason that she thought it was leading her man astray, that these ideas that were being fermented by the image of Zeus pleasuring Leda were a bad influence. So rather than expose him to any more of it, she destroyed it. That's why it isn't there anymore, and that's why we only know it through the assorted copies.
And there's a fine drawing in the Royal Academy, isn't there, which they used to think for a long time was a preparatory drawing, a cartoon for it, but now scholars aren't so sure. But it used to be really highly prized. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, but it's Leda's head, isn't it? It's a beautiful close-up of the head. Is that
No, it's the whole. There's a drawing of the whole thing
Okay.
in the collections gallery.
There's a beautiful drawing of Leda's head, and it's actually incredibly sensitive and beautiful, and better than the Leda that you see in all the paintings. In the paintings, she tends to look like a bit of a blank silhouette, as if she's been copied from something. But in the Michelangelo drawing, there's a sensitivity and a tenderness, because you know what a great artist he was. So anyway, listen, enough of these swans, Bendy. I mean, we've done our bit for trying to save the swan for Britain, stop all these hungry Eastern Europeans on the rampage around Britain, eating every swan that they can see. So if listeners, you find there are no swans near you anymore because they've all been eaten by hungry Eastern Europeans, you can at least turn to art, where there are lots of swans that hopefully will keep you satisfied.
The irony, of course, is, well, that it was actually the English who were Europe's premier swan eaters. So other nations, like in the 14th and 15th centuries, people in France, for example, used to think that the English were quite eccentric for eating swans all the time. So it's us who've had the taste for swan meat.
There you go, you see. And Henry VIII was a great swan eater as well, wasn't he? So, I mean, we've been traduced. We Eastern Europeans have been traduced by the savage swan-eating Brits and their savage swan-eating history. And on that note, and also given the fact that I'm feeling a bit hungover still, let's have a quick break, shall we, Bendy? I need a rest.
Waldy and Bendy.
That was a nice break. Bendy, very, very quickly, I think, let's get away from these swans for a minute. I just wanted to mention something that I know you've been enjoying, which is what America's President Donald Trump has been getting up to in the White House. Now, hilariously, the White House has been turned into something of a gold house, hasn't it? Have you been keeping abreast of that awful change that's going on there?
Yeah, I've been absolutely fascinated to see the Oval Office. He's been making it more and more gold. And I didn't think he could possibly fit any more gold in, but he did this little video online on social media just a couple of days ago, proudly showing off even more of these extraordinary kind of gold applique bits that he's going to stick up on the wall. So it's getting so cartoony. I mean, obviously, we're not a political podcast, so we must only limit ourselves to expressions about his taste. But I think his taste is not good.
It is so ghastly, isn't it? I mean, the thing is that the White House, ever since it became the presidential residence in 1800, I mean, people do keep changing it. It's very hard to be a president, it seems, and not come in and do something to it. So there have been all sorts of changes over the years. The last really big change was, of course, Jackie Kennedy's big makeover, wasn't it? She put a rose garden in and she changed all the rooms around. But that's as nothing compared with what Donald Trump has done here. So he's pulled out his pot of gold paint. He's painted every single thing that's sticking up on the walls gold. And he's made it look like, somebody said rather rudely, like a wrestler's dressing room. But there are all sorts of things you could call it. But the White House has been turned into this very strange space. And you see it in photographs. So, like, when Zelensky went the first time to see Trump, the back was sitting in the Oval Office, and behind him was like an empty mantelpiece with a couple of pictures on it. And then when he went back a second time, the mantelpiece had filled up with these garden urns that Trump has arranged in a big row on the mantelpiece. There's an endless amount of paintings as well on the walls. I mean, there used to be, like, I think Barack Obama only had 2 paintings of former presidents on the walls. Trump has put in 20 paintings of former presidents. And his gold coasters. So, he's got his gold coasters on every table with the word Trump written on them in gold, and they look like gold bars.
Yeah.
But really, it's just a funny thing, isn't it? I mean, you expect this of dictators, don't you? I mean, do you remember when Saddam Hussein's palace was raided? Or Gaddafi's palace? They covered everything with gold, and they were awful, lurid, vulgar taste. You just don't expect it of your American presidents, do you, Bendy?
No, but I think it reveals 2 really interesting art historical phenomena, actually, and that's why I thought it'd be interesting to very quickly talk about it. The first, you mentioned the portraits, right? So he's massively introduced more portraits, and he's got this great triple hang above the fireplace. Now, when rulers do this, they're trying to cloak themselves with the legitimacy of their predecessors. And this is something that the Romans did. So they called it translatio et imitator imperii. And it's basically the idea that as the emperor, as the ruler, you draw some of your authority by presenting yourselves as the latest in the line of those previous rulers. So, for example, it's why Napoleon, when he declares himself emperor, he makes himself appear like, Caesar Augustus. And we get this all the time in British history. So Henry VII, after he seizes the throne at the Battle of Bosworth, he commissions this great string of portraits, of which he's the latest in the royal line. Richard III obviously doesn't figure, and it goes all the way back to the first, what he thought the first kings of Britain were. So Trump is doing that with putting all the portraits in.
So that's one of the things that he's following up on. You said there were 2. What's the other one?
Oh, the other one is just this conception of magnificence, and that goes back to classical days too. I mean, Aristotle is the first one to say that rulers must be magnificent because it's a way of differentiating yourselves from everyone else. I mean, the ultimate expression of that, I suppose, is sticking a stonking great gold crown on your head. It's just a way of saying, I am more magnificent than you, therefore I'm in charge. But it really gets going in Europe, in Western Europe, after the Renaissance, and particularly rulers like the rulers of the Netherlands, who, for example, find themselves needing to compete with their more powerful neighbours, Holy Roman Empire on one side, France on the other, and so they turn basically to magnificence and to art, and that's why, we're laughing about Trump and his magnificence, and he's got terrible taste, and he's not going to do much for the future, I think, of American art in this sphere. But this need for rulers to demonstrate magnificence and bling is actually extremely important in the development of art, because it's no accident that the rulers of the Netherlands, wanting to portray themselves as magnificent with things like tapestries and gold cups and paintings and all this stuff, then leads to the Netherlands becoming the cradle of the European Renaissance. So how about that?
It's so true, isn't it? Just the whole idea of royal portraiture, if you like. Going back even further to imperial portraiture. So Julius Caesar has his portrait made. It's not because he wants people to know what he looks like. It's because his head on a bust would mark out his territory, wouldn't it? It's a way of sort of possessing an empire. And I mean, you saw it in communist China, didn't you, with all those pictures of Mao everywhere. When you've got a picture of Mao somewhere or other, it's just this way of marking out your territory. And Trump and his image, with his ghastly tangerine baby face of his, the way that's plastered all over the place and the gold that surrounds it. I mean, these are all things you expect, really, of some kind of despot, some kind of crazy emperor, some sort of big ruler, but not really of a democratically elected American president. And that's the thing here, isn't it? That's the rub, is that it's got someone behaving like Napoleon, when really he ought not to be doing that, because that's not what he is. He's something different. He's the embodiment of an ideal, of an independent republic. So there's the mismatch between the way Trump is presenting himself and his taste in art, the way that's magnifying the way he's misrepresenting himself, and what it should be. That's weird, isn't it? And that's what's unsettling about it all, I find.
Yeah, yeah. The next thing to watch for, of course, is if he tries to put himself on the money, because we have the king's head on our coins in our pocket, and it's a key way of marking royal authority and currency. So if you see him talking about, well, I want to be on the next dollar bill, then that's another milestone to be aware of.
Maybe it'll happen after he gets this Peace Prize he's telling us about. Oh, listen, Bendy, enough of Trump. We need to move on to something more fun, I think. I mean, we know what Donald Trump has got on the wall there these days because we've seen the pictures. But what we don't know is what we'd like to put on the wall.
On the wall.
On the wall, the bit of the podcast where we get to talk about things that we'd like to have on our wall. Bendy, over to you this time. So what pleasure have you got for our shared wall? What are we going to be looking at?
Well, when I told you the other day that I wanted to do a painting by Sir Thomas Lawrence, Waldy, your eyes rolled and you uttered a little groan, and I was shocked to hear that.
Well, Lawrence, for a start, you're always talking about Thomas Lawrence. If it's not Thomas Lawrence, it's Van Dyck. Basically, I know that he's one of your two favourite painters.
He's so good, though.
And I have just this inbuilt resistance to flashy painters. I like painters with a bit of depth, a bit of, resonance to their thinking. And Lawrence, listen, no question, he had it in his hands. He was one of those artists who could paint fluently and brilliantly and catch the dazzle of everything. He could do all that. But the subject matter, if you consider that he's sort of more or less contemporary with somebody like, David Delacroix, those kind of times, Géricault. And yet what they're doing is so much more modern, so much more on the cusp of society's movements than what Lawrence is doing. So those are my prejudices with him, but I know you're going to battle against those ideas, and I know you're going to present another side to him. So let's hear it all. Come on, from the double-barreled why Thomas Lawrence is so great and why this picture's so good. From you, please, Bendy.
Yeah, I've chosen what I think is actually his most profound, moving, and mysterious and misunderstood painting. It's a portrait called Portrait of Isabella Wolfe, and it belongs to the Art Institute in Chicago. It's a large thing, and I think it demonstrates not only why Lawrence is a clever painter, a thoughtful painter, but also he's so brilliant in his technique. I seriously think that in the history of Western painting, he's up there in the top 5 in terms of ability to wield a loaded brush, which of course just came to him naturally because he was a child genius and self-taught. And you can zoom in, folks, on the Art Institute of Chicago has a very good website online. You can zoom right into this picture and see Lawrence's amazing brushwork. But I want to talk about what this picture means. Let me describe it very quickly. So Isabella Wolfe, we're probably talking a woman in her late 20s, maybe about 30. We see her, she's sat on a chair. She's wearing an entirely white sort of silken dress. And she's got her left arm draped behind her on the chair back. And her right arm is holding her head. We see her in profile. And it's holding her head because she's reading a book. And so she's resting her right arm on the table which the book is sitting on.
She looks a bit like I feel today, actually. I would be clutching my head because I've got a hangover, and she seems to be clutching her head with some of the same vigour that I feel I could be showing clutching my head. So she hasn't got a headache, is what you're saying, yeah?
No, she's having a profound contemplative moment. So, and she's sitting, I should say, in a kind of arched interior setting in front of a red screen. Now, the other interesting clue here is that not only do we see what is represented on the book before her, can you see there's a sort of engraved image. Can you see that?
Well, I can see it, but I have no idea what it shows. It's too blurry.
Okay. And before we come on to me telling you what the book is, I'll just point out that behind her, sort of peeping out between the screen and the background setting, is a sculpture. And it's a head of a woman looking up in some pain, and she's shielding a small child beneath her. So these are two major clues we're going to be talking about. First of all, let me come back to the book. So the book, Wild, excitingly, is an engraving of Michelangelo. So it's a book of Michelangelo's Sibyls from the Sistine Chapel ceiling. How about that?
Yes, I know them well. I've done a film on them. They're a beautiful collection of faces of different types, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So Lawrence was as obsessed with Michelangelo as I think you are. So he was number one Michelangelo fan. And we know he owned this volume of engravings from the Sistine Chapel. Now, on one level, it's just a sort of witty pun. So
I'd to interrupt
the
quickly. So, which of the Sibyls is it? Because I know it's a bit blurry. Is it the Delphic Sibyl that we're looking at? Do you know? Is it? Well, she's the one, the beautiful one, the really beautiful Sibyl, isn't she? Up on
Yes,
the ceiling.
absolutely. Well spotted. I'm impressed. It is the Delphic Sibyl.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's really important. So, on one level, it's a bit of a pun because the sitter is Isabella Wolf, Sibyl, and it's an engraving of a Sibyl. And we know that we know Lawrence loved a pun, apparently. But I think the fact that, as you've noticed, it's the Delphic Sibyl. Now, if something is Delphic, it's what, sort of ambiguous, uncertain? What do you think?
Well, she comes from Delphi, and that's what it means. So,
Yeah.
yes, I mean, she was supposedly the most beautiful. But yeah, as an adjective these days, you mean it's more modern use. Yes, it could mean mysterious, secretive, definitely.
Yeah. Well, the Delphic oracle gives you kind of pronouncements, but they're
And all the
sometimes a little
Sibyls were
bit
fortune
ambiguous.
tellers, basically. So
Yeah.
their whole idea about them was that they told the emperors used to go to them and kings used to go to them and ask them what's going to happen in the future because the Sibyls knew, right? So yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think in this case, the Delphic Sibyl is telling us that there's a kind of ambiguity going on. And here I'm going to read you a really great line from Thomas Lawrence. And he wrote this to the sitter, to Isabella Wolf, in one of their many letters. He says, "A really fine critic should, on looking at a picture, be able to assign a cause and motive for every form and hue that composes it, since nothing is a matter of accident." Now, you're a very great critic, and I'm impressed. You've already noticed that the Sibyl is the Delphic Sibyl. So what else would you, as a great critic, what else are we going to be looking for to unpack the possible meaning of this painting?
Well, apart from the way she's holding her head as if she's got a big headache, the beautiful white satin dress, that's angelic, gorgeous. There's a rose tucked just under her bosom, that's beautifully done. And she looks as if she could be an Oriental figure herself, isn't it? I mean, we gave Wolf as the clue, didn't we, at the beginning of the programme? Isabella Wolf does look like something of a Delphic Sibyl herself, I would say. And there's certainly a suggestion here that she's more than the love interest of a great British painter, that she's some kind of Cassandra figure. She certainly looks as if she comes from the East with that funny little hat that she's got as well, a kind of Eastern-looking hat. So is it something to do with ideas that she too is the Sibyl? Is that what you're after?
Well, I think you put your finger on it. Partly, it's the whole thing is very Michelangelo-esque, and she's meant to be kind of alluring and enticing and mysterious. Now, I should mention here the really important fact that Isabella and Lawrence had been lovers. So this picture is painted in around 1815, and they had met around 15 years earlier. And something had happened. We're not entirely sure what, but they had fallen in love and some kind of physical relationship had happened. Now, Isabella, awkwardly for Lawrence, because I think she was the love of his life, she was married. So Wolf, Jens Wolf, her husband he was the Danish consul in London. Now, the really interesting thing is that by the time this picture was painted, Isabella and Jens had divorced. They divorced in 1810, some 5 years before. And Jens was a terrible person and treated her very badly and made all sorts of threats to Isabella. And she had to kind of fall on Lawrence's support. And this obviously gave rise to all sorts of gossip at the time. So John Constable, for example, is one of the people who records that the two had been quite intimate. And in fact, that they had had a son together. Now, Isabella's son is called Herman. And if you look him up, he's called Herman Wolf because he takes their name, right? He takes the Wolf name, Jens and Isabella Wolf. But the really intriguing fact, is that when Isabella Wolf gets divorced from Jens Wolf, she attests that they had never, in fact, had any children. So what do you think that suggests?
Bad memory. That's why she's holding her head like that. Memory loss. I don't know.
No, Lawrence is the father. Lawrence is the
Yeah.
father of Herman Wolfe, right?
Yes.
John Constable is one of the people who hints at this, and indeed Herman Wolfe does feature in Lawrence's life, quite extensively right towards the end. He's there in Lawrence's house, for example, when Lawrence dies. Now, I think one of the reasons the picture is Delphic and ambiguous is because, owing to the standards of the time, they couldn't be open about this. And Isabella apparently didn't really want to marry Lawrence and spend the rest of his life with him, which caused Lawrence some upset. But I think where I'm going to really push you with one of my fantasies, Wild, and I'd love to get listeners' reaction to this, is that I think there's a swan-like connection to this picture. And you mentioned earlier that
You mean
the
could she
story...
wear this beautiful white dress, which could pass for a sort of swanny presence? It's a beautiful white dress. Is that what
Yeah, indeed. But you mentioned earlier the story of Leda and the Swan, and you owned a print after Michelangelo's Leda and the Swan, and oddly enough, we know that Lawrence owned the same print, not your one, but another impression of that print. And Lawrence, as I mentioned, was obsessed with Michelangelo, and he had even tried to buy the great drawing in the Royal Academy, the one which at the time was thought to be Michelangelo's picture of Leda and the Swan. And I think, actually, Isabella's pose here, with the arm over the back, sort of slightly awkward, and in the profile, her pose is recreating the pose of Leda in Leda and the Swan. And what do you think about that?
I
Can
think
you
that's
see
pushing
it?
it. No, I think that's absolutely pushing it. Apart from anything else,
Oh
Leda
no,
is
come on.
lying down, and Isabella sitting.
Well, she's sort of recumbent, so
But I mean,
you could...
what she? I certainly take the Michelangelo suggestion because a lot of the figures on the Sistine ceiling are seen in this kind of way, so seated in quite awkward positions, unnaturally often to create an interesting pose rather than a natural pose. So a Michelangelo mood, yes, but I wouldn't instinctively say that she's like Leda. She's like a lot of figures on the Sistine ceiling, in fact, that are seen from the side in this interesting profile. Would be my instant reaction to that.
Okay, well, I'll just steer you quickly towards the statue in the background, because this is the figure of Niobe and her daughters. As I'm sure you know, the story of Niobe is that she had 12 children, and they got killed by the gods, Apollo. And in the story of Niobe and her daughter, she's begging for her last child to be protected. And this appears to be some illusion, because we know that Jens Wolff owned a cast of this statue. He owned lots of statues, as many people did in those days, classical statues. And in the kind of the turbulence of the divorce, when Isabella and Jens were divorcing and Lawrence was involved, some kind of threat appears to have been made towards the child, Herman. So I think that statue is an allusion to that. Now, the reason I mention that is I'm going to bring you back to the story of Leda and see if this changes your mind as to whether this great painting is in fact a kind of strange reference to that story of Leda and the Swan. Because Leda, when she is seduced by Zeus, the story of Leda is that on the same night she had also slept with her husband, right?
Yes. Hence two eggs, and nobody's quite sure who fathered both of them.
Okay, so do you see how this takes us to the parentage of poor Herman Wolff?
Shakily, but yes, go on. Yes, there is a very shaky link, yes.
So he can't be acknowledged by Lawrence. Lawrence is never kind of absolutely sure if it's his son, and he's called Herman Wolff, so he takes the name of Jens Wolff. But Isabella is never clear who the father was.
Right. Yes, go on. And
So that's why Lawrence is choosing this rather, what many people have said is a slightly awkward pose, and a number of Michelangelo references, but actually he's trying to cast the great love of his life in the form of Leda.
right. Well, he hasn't done a very good job of it, has he? If it is indeed her, it's very easy to miss. I love all these ideas, but they're a little bit conspiracy theory-ish to me.
No,
But
no,
I,
no.
Where I think I do agree is this, there is a sense in which this pose and the idea of her as some kind of Sibyl-like Eastern figure, those are things that have a relationship to Michelangelo. Certainly, I agree with that.
Yeah. Well, okay, now I'm going to really push the magic eye stuff at the risk of turning you off. But I want our listeners to have a look and see if they see what I see, right? So I'm going to turn you towards the book, the Michelangelo print book, which is put on this sort of rather strange cushion. Now, we know Lawrence owned this book, and in actual fact, the book is smaller in real life than it's here, but it's been enlarged. And I want you to look at that very strange sort of twirl of fabric that nestles between the book and the figure of Isabella, and it creeps up her shoulder, and then it sort of turns into what we assume is some of her hair coming down over her shoulder. Can you see that?
Yeah, she's got her hair coming down her shoulder, and there's some fabric there. Agreed.
Yeah. Now, I think if you squint a bit, right, do you not see a swan there?
Bendy. Oh God, I dreaded the thought that you might be heading somewhere like this. No,
Yeah,
I don't see a
I can
swan
see
there. There is no
producer
swan.
Taya is nodding in agreement vigorously with me here.
She was at the party last night as well. She drank too much too. There is no swan there. There is a piece of cloth which is hanging down over her shoulder, and her hair, and the book is a big lumpy book. But any similarity to a penetrating
It's even got a
swan.
foot. Look, do you see it's got a foot? The swan has a foot coming down from that strange bit of carpet underneath it.
No, it doesn't. There's a
does.
shadow
It's
or
his leg.
something or other under the cloth.
Yeah.
Bendy, what are you talking about? I mean, there is no swan there. I mean, this is a clear case of pareidolia, isn't it? That thing where people see faces in the clouds. I just sorry. With the best will in the world, I think that is absolutely wishful thinking on your part. I could buy into there may be an implication of Leda in the figure of Wolf, but not. No, there's no deliberate swan. But you know, all this harks back to you know the story of Freud and Leonardo da Vinci and the vulture, right?
No.
You don't.
No.
You know Sigmund Freud only wrote one, although he used art a lot, loved it, collected it, he only wrote one important, as it were, work about art, and that was his psychoanalytical study of Leonardo da Vinci, and in particular, this idea that Leonardo had incorporated the hidden image of a vulture into his painting of the Virgin and St. Anne that's now in the Louvre. So, in one of Leonardo's codexes, he tells of this story he remembered when he was a baby lying in a crib, and he says that a vulture came down to him when he was a baby, and it stuck its tail in his mouth and frightened him. So Freud takes this incident, which Leonardo describes, and does a whole psychoanalytical rant about it. And he says that Leonardo is having these proto-homosexual ideas of fellatio. So the vulture's tail is a kind of stand-in phallus, but also ideas of breastfeeding, the mother's nipple perhaps going into his mouth. It's the whole Freudian thing about it. And it ends on this idea that in the painting of the Virgin and St. Anne in the Louvre, that if you look at it carefully and turn the cloth sideways, it's exactly what you're talking about here, by the way. If you turn the cloth sideways, that you can see the outline of a vulture in the painting. Actually, I'm going to get it up on my screen now, just to see where he meant. Baby Jesus is there holding a lamb, and the blue cloth of the Virgin Mary is supposed to form the shape of a vulture. So, of course, this has been completely poo-pooed. And more importantly, it later turned out that Freud was using a translation of the Leonardo Codex that had misread one of the words. So the word that they thought said vulture, in other words, that Leonardo's memory was of a vulture, was actually a kite, which is a completely different bird, as you know. Kites are these scavengers that you see a lot of in North Italy. It was actually a kite that came down to him, not a vulture. So the whole vulture hidden in the painting fantasy that Freud had was poo-pooed by art historians and art critics in exactly the same way that I am poo-pooing your swan in the picture of Isabella Wolf fantasy.
I think
case.
Thomas Lawrence would not be calling you a really fine critic. And I think, you see, I'm going to put this picture on my social media, and I'd like you to too. Let's do a poll. Let's invite people to give us their opinions and see what they think. But you've conceded that there is an element of Leda in the picture, in her pose, and there's a lot of Michelangelo going on in there. The narrative of her life at the time fits the bill, and he tried to buy the drawing of Leda and the Swan, and he was quite a saucy fellow, Lawrence. So I wouldn't have put it past him. But I do concede that I shall never able to persuade you of this extraordinary art historical breakthrough I've made. And I'll just have to plot my revenge one day on you for this. But, I'll get over it.
Well, I hope in between this and the next podcast, Bendy, you lay off the peyote, is all I can say. But yes, let's put them up. Let people decide. Let the voice of the people be heard, as Donald Trump might say. So yes, I can't see it, but maybe others can. Maybe others can. And on that half a bombshell, I think we are finishing off here. We've talked about lots of things. Don't forget, everybody, should you wish to join in with Bendy's extraordinary Isabella wolf fantasy, you can find all the pictures and everything you need on the ZCZ webpage with our show notes. And you can watch it all on the telly too. If you're watching on a computer screen, you can watch the special stuff we have on YouTube, again on the ZCZ channel on YouTube. So from me and all the swans we've been dealing with, and Bendor's fantasy swans as well, it's goodbye for now.
Goodbye from me, and a swan song from me, I should say.
Waldy and Bendy.
Squawk, squawk.